My son sent me a text message on my 65th birthday that broke my heart, but saved my bank account. He wrote, "Dad, stop calling us. Don't expect us to take care of you in your old age because I have my own life and family now. Sell your big house and check yourself into a nursing home." I read the message twice, took a sip of my scotch, and walked to my wall safe. He had no idea that the house he told me to sell was the only thing standing between him and a prison cell. He had no idea that the lavish lifestyle he'd grown so comfortable with was propped up by loans he'd long since forgotten signing. I didn't rage, I didn't mourn. I simply opened my ledger and made the decision to collect what was owed. My name is Gerald Hartwell, and this is the story of how I showed my ungrateful son that the Bank of Dad is officially closed. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here for this one. If stories like this one speak to you, tap, subscribe, so the next one finds its way to you without you having to go looking. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments just based on what you know. So far, do you think a father can ever truly get through to a son who has stopped listening? And one quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. 65 years old. I hadn't expected anyone to make a fuss. Elaine was the one who used to transform this place, balloons strung across the ceiling, the whole house carrying the scent of her roasting chicken. She'd been gone a long time, but a phone call 5 minutes of someone's day that I had counted on. Some small sign that I still existed to them. Instead, I sat in my leather armchair, positioned toward a cold, unlit fireplace. My phone rested on the side table beside me, dark, mute. I'd checked the ringer 3 separate times, certain I must have silenced it by accident. I hadn't. 7 o'clock that evening, the screen finally came alive. Something lurched in my chest, small and embarrassing. I picked it up, my grip unhurried. 40 years as a structural engineer, I designed bridges built to outlast earthquakes. Steady hands, always. What I found waiting for me was a message from Colton, not a call, not even a few minutes of Finn on a video screen, my grandson's face filling the frame, a wall of typed words. I settled my reading glasses on my nose and absorbed every line. "Dad, Renata and I have been talking. You are reaching retirement age officially today. We want to set some boundaries now to avoid awkwardness later. Don't expect us to take care of you or invite you to live with us when you get too old. I have my own life, my own family, and my own financial pressure. You need to be realistic. Sell your house, use the money to pay for a facility, and don't become a burden on us. Happy birthday." I went through it once. Then I read every word again aloud, my voice coming out rough and strange in the silence. Happy birthday. There it was, the crowning touch. He'd driven the blade straight through my sternum and left a festive little bow on the hilt. I let my eyes travel around the room. The grand piano stood against the far wall. Colton had practiced on that bench for 6 years, $300 a month in lessons until he turned 18 and never lifted the fallboard again. On the mantel, his framed college graduation portrait. Every dollar of that education had come from me. The dorm, the books he left, unread the fraternity dues that purchased him a social circle, all of it. Another man in my position might have wept. A smaller man would have been on the phone within the minute, voice cracking, searching for whatever he'd done to deserve this. But something shifted in me that wasn't grief. The warmth of shame that had been climbing toward my jaw reversed course abruptly. Went cold. Hardened. The engineer's mind engaged. A structural failure, that's what I was observing. You don't stand at the foot of a compromised bridge and grieve the concrete. You post the warning signs. You shut it down. You walk away from the loss. I set the phone aside without drama, rose from the chair, and moved through to the kitchen, where I poured 2 fingers of the bourbon I had been saving for a special occasion. It qualified, just not in the way I'd imagined. This was the evening my last illusions cashed out. I swallowed a measure of it and felt the warmth track down. Then I crossed to my study, the room I had always considered mine alone. Old paper lemon oil quiet that had weight to it. A painting of the Portland skyline hung behind the oak desk. I pulled it from the wall on its hinges. A steel safe sat recessed in the plaster behind it. I worked the dial, left to 32. Right to 10, left to 55. The mechanism turned over with the kind of precise, unhurried click that good engineering produces. The door came open, no cash inside. Cash was for people who trusted luck over systems it could burn, get stolen, disappear. What lived in this safe were papers, a great many of them. The world looked at me and clocked a retired man coasting on a modest pension, somebody's grandfather, behind the wheel of a 6-year-old Chevy truck. Colton read that picture the same way everybody else did. He figured whatever I had tucked away was dwindling by the year. That assessment was wrong. I withdrew a thick burgundy leather binder from the back of the safe, laid it flat on the desk, and clicked on the brass desk lamp. The circle of light fell across the cover, my ledger. When I divested my shares in the construction firm, 5 years back, I cleared $4 million after the government took its share. Colton never heard a word of it. My intention had been to let him find his own footing, build some backbone the way I'd had to. I meant for him to earn something. I failed at that. I parted the binder's cover. Every sleeve held a document, not keepsakes, not ceremonial paper. Promissory notes, notarized, legally binding, every one of them. First page, dated 10 years ago. Colton had just walked across a stage and collected his diploma. What he needed next, he said, was a vehicle that projected authority. He was entering real estate and couldn't show up in something sensible. He had his eye on a Porsche Cayenne. I recommended a reliable Toyota. He countered that perception was the whole game. Renata, who he was dating then, had looked at my truck like it was something scraped off her shoe. So the Porsche happened, $80,000, and I put a sheet of paper in front of him before I handed over the keys. I can still picture it, Colton, with the keychain already looped around his finger eyes, skimming the document I'd pushed across the table. "Dad, why do we have to be so formal?" he'd asked. I told him that business was business. His signature sprawled across the line, big, careless, the handwriting of someone who expected nothing to come due. I pressed my fingertip to it. Promissory note, Vazujiwa 1. Principal amount, $80,000. Interest rate, 2%. Next page. The wedding. Lord, that wedding. Renata had her vision. A vineyard in the Willamette Valley, imported orchids cascading from every surface, a string quartet that probably cost more than some people's cars. I offered an alternative, a church something, grounded right here in Portland. Renata dissolved into tears, told Colton I was sabotaging everything she'd ever wanted. Colton appeared in my doorway, eyes on the floor hat in hand. I signed the check, $150,000. Promissory note, 005. Both Colton and Renata signed it. Knowing those two, they were too deep into the champagne to distinguish a loan agreement from a seating chart. The pages kept coming, their penthouse down payment, the emergency funds when Colton's credit line buckled after a European vacation, startup capital for Renata's boutique, which folded before it found its legs. The last entry stopped me. 6 months prior, Colton had turned up at my door looking like he hadn't slept, pale, perspiring, barely holding it together. A speculative property deal had caved in on him. He was $15 short, or he'd forfeited his real estate license entirely. I covered it. Now I looked at the figure ruled across the bottom of the spreadsheet. $482,500, principal only. Stack the interest on top, and we were well past $500,000. But the dollar amount was never the point. The point was one paragraph repeated at the base of every note, Clause 4, Section B. I lifted my glasses slightly and read it aloud into the stillness. The lender, Gerald Hartwell, reserves the right to demand full repayment of the principal and accrued interest at any time for any reason. This note is callable on demand. Upon receipt of a formal demand letter, the borrower has 30 days to settle the debt in full before legal proceedings and asset seizure commence. Callable on demand. Colton had signed each of those pages without reading past the first line. As far as he was concerned, these documents were theater something to let the old man feel like a proper banker. He assumed I was a permanent cushion beneath him, always there to absorb the fall. My eyes went back to the phone. The message still sat there, screen dimmed but legible. Don't expect us to take care of you. I shut the binder. In that silent room, the sound arrived like a crack of a rifle. Independent son. You want to discuss independence. You want your own life unencumbered. We'll revisit the conversation once the lender comes for everything built on borrowed ground. I didn't go to bed. Rest wasn't in the cards. What I did instead was draw a clean sheet from the printer, uncap my fountain pen, and sit. The letter I composed was not addressed to my son. It was addressed to my attorney, Mr. Drummond. My hand moved without trembling. Dear Drummond, please prepare the necessary filings to activate Clause 8 of the Hartwell Family Trust immediately. Remove Colton Hartwell as a beneficiary. Secondly, I am attaching copies of 15 promissory notes. I want you to issue a formal demand letter for the total amount to be sent to Colton's office by courier on Monday morning. I stopped. On the desk corner sat a photograph of Finn, my grandson. 8 years old, maybe in the picture. He had nothing to do with any of this. Guilt stirred in my gut, I acknowledged it and pressed it back under. If the rot wasn't cut away now, Finn would spend his whole life learning his father's lessons. Entitlement, weakness, cruelty. I kept writing. If payment is not received within 30 days, initiate foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, including his primary residence and personal vehicles. My signature went down at the bottom. Gerald Arthur Hartwell. Light was beginning to gather over Portland, the pale gray of early morning, pressing in around the blinds, and I could see motes of dust hanging undisturbed in the still air. Something in me had loosened, been set down. A father carries a particular kind of weight heavier still when the child on your back refuses to use his own legs. A creditor's burden is altogether different, cleaner, straightforward. Manageable? Just math. That's all it was. I brewed a pot of coffee in the kitchen and stood there drinking it black while the city outside went about its business. Colton's text message had stopped stinging. If anything, I was close to thankful for it. He'd finally handed me the clearance I'd been waiting for, to stop playing the role of father and step into the role of creditor. He wanted the house sold out from under me. He wanted me warehoused somewhere quiet out of sight, where he could bide his time until the inheritance came through. I finished my cup, bitter and hot the way I like it. Portland was going to see some very interesting activity in its real estate market come Monday. My son was about to discover that when you set fire to a bridge, you should first confirm you're not standing on it. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Wells Fargo Center was swift and silent. My ears adjusted as the doors parted onto the polished marble reception of Drummond and Associates, a firm built on the business of protecting fortunes and, when necessary, dismantling lives. One elegant signature at a time. I passed the receptionist who greeted me by name, the burgundy ledger pressed to my chest like armor. I hadn't come today to lay foundations. I'd come to pull them out. Walter Drummond was already waiting. 30 years of friendship between us, going back to when I was running job sites and he was a public defender with worn soles on his shoes. These days he wore Italian suits and carried the eyes of a man who'd witnessed every conceivable form of human greed up close. He didn't reach for the coffee pot. One look at my face and he poured sparkling water into 2 glasses instead. He settled behind his mahogany desk, all glass and steel. The whole city of Portland spread out beyond the window that Colton had always wanted to be part of. I said nothing. I unlocked my phone and pushed it across to him. The message from Colton was still on the screen. Drummond found his reading glasses and worked through it without a sound. His face gave nothing away. No flinch, no head shake, no sharp intake of breath. What came out was a single long measured exhale through his nose, the kind of sound a physician makes when the scan confirms what he suspected. He slid the phone back toward me. "So," he said, his voice low and unhurried, "it begins." I told him the waiting was finished. The lectures, the warnings, the quiet disappointment, all of it was behind me now. I set the ledger on his desk. He opened it. His eyes moved methodically across the pages, dates, principal amounts, signatures, the full accounting of what my generosity had built. He slowed at the Porsche note. He paused longer at the wedding entry. He lingered over the penthouse down payment. Then he looked up, and something like admiration sharpened his expression. "You kept every one of them," he said. "You actually held on to all of it." I told him I'd never discarded a contract in my life. Drummond closed the binder and leaned back, the fingers steepled, studying the ceiling for a moment, the way he always did when his mind was turning at full speed. He looked like something that had just detected a scent in dark water. "Gerald," he said, "do you grasp what you're sitting on here? This isn't a sentimental ledger of family loans. This is a demolition charge. Most parents hand money to their children and quietly reclassify it as a gift the moment it leaves their hands. They might call it a loan at the kitchen table, but nothing gets written down, nothing gets witnessed. So, when the relationship sours, they're left with nothing. No paper, no standing, no recourse. But this is entirely different." He tapped the cover of the binder. "These are demand notes, Gerald. Cast your mind back to when we drafted these templates a decade ago. I told you then that the acceleration clause is the sharpest instrument in contract law. Clause 4, Section B. It means you aren't waiting for a missed payment. You aren't waiting for him to run out of money. You can call the entire balance principal and all accrued interest at any moment for any reason whatsoever. I asked him to walk me through what would actually happen. I needed it spelled out. I needed to see the sequence of events clearly before I could commit to it. Drummond rose and moved to the window, looking down at the rain-slick streets of Portland. Then he turned back to me. "Here is exactly how it works," he said. "We compose the formal demand letter today. Every note in this book gets cited by name. We calculate the compounded interest at the federal minimum rate generous on our part, which lands the total just under $500,000. We send it by certified mail to his office. Not his home, his office. We need his assistant to sign for delivery. We need that timestamp on record." He let that sit for a moment. "Once the letter is accepted, the clock starts running. 30 days, Gerald. He has exactly 30 days to hand you a check for $482,000. When he can't, and we already know he can't, he's in default. On day 31, we file a motion for summary judgment. Because the notes are notarized and the signatures hold, there's no courtroom drama, no jury. The judge reviews the paperwork, confirms the debt, and brings down the gavel." I asked him what came after the judgment. Drummond moved back to the desk and braced both hands on it, his eyes level with mine. "That's when the machinery really starts moving," he said. "We obtain a writ of execution. That puts the sheriff's authority behind us, the power to seize assets against the outstanding debt. We freeze his accounts. We attach his wages. We place a lien on that penthouse he's so proud of. And since that property is almost certainly mortgaged past its eyebrows, our lien triggers a default with his mortgage lender. The bank forecloses before we've even had to break a sweat." He sat down, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "We will strip him, Gerald. Credit score assets standing in this city, the ability to borrow so much as $1 from any institution in this country gone. For the next 7 years, he won't be approved for an apartment lease. He won't qualify for a car payment. He will be financial dust." I looked at the ledger. My thoughts drifted to Colton at 5 years old, wobbling down the sidewalk on a bicycle, trusting me to hold the seat. I remembered the morning I taught him to tie his laces, his tongue poking out in concentration. A wave of something close to nausea moved through me. Was this really where we had arrived? Was I genuinely prepared to reduce my own son to rubble over a text message? I looked across the desk at Drummond. "Maybe I was overcorrecting," I said. "Maybe I should simply write him out of the will and let him go. Let him drift. He's still my son. Robert, he's still the boy I used to carry on my shoulders." Drummond didn't blink. He reached into the side drawer and produced a manila folder. He dropped it on the desk and let it skid to a stop directly in front of me. "Open it," he said. I did. Inside was a background check, a full financial investigation report. I asked him what I was looking at. "I commissioned this on Colton 6 months ago," Drummond said. "When you told me he'd come to you for that $50,000, the real estate flip story, I wanted to verify the deal existed. It didn't. There was no property, Gerald, no flip. He used your $50,000 to clear a gambling debt owed to a bookmaker in Las Vegas." I stared at the page. The wire transfers were right there. The dates matched. Drummond's voice hardened as he leaned forward. "He didn't simply disrespect you, Gerald. He's been stealing from you, lying to your face. And that text message you got on your birthday, that wasn't emotion, it wasn't frustration. It was strategy. He's decided the lemon is squeezed out and it's time to drop the rind. He thinks you're finished as a resource. He thinks you're a lonely old man who'll absorb any treatment rather than risk losing what little contact remains." He pointed directly at me. "If you walk away from this, you aren't protecting him. You're feeding the thing he's becoming. He is 32 years old. Consequences he doesn't face now are consequences he never learns. And think past him for a moment. Think about your grandson. Think about Finn. Do you want Finn growing up, watching his father treat people as disposable, learning that is the standard?" The mention of Finn closed the argument. I thought about my grandson absorbing his father's example the way children do, silently and completely. I thought about that cycle entitlement contempt, indifference, carrying itself forward into another generation. I closed the file. The hesitation was gone. The engineer had returned. The structural assessment was complete, and the failure was confirmed beyond any doubt. The demolition order was ready to be signed. I told Drummond to proceed. He nodded once. His finger found the intercom button. "Page, bring in the notary and the standard demand letter templates, and pull the trust documents for the Hartwell estate. We're making amendments." For the better part of the next hour, the only sound in that office was my pen moving across paper. I signed the trust amendments excising Colton from it entirely. In his place, I established a new irrevocable trust for Finn, sealed until he turned 25, with a clause requiring him to be employed and drug-free before a single dollar could touch his hands. Then came the demand letter. Drummond slid it across to me. It was short. It was frigid. It was the kind of formal that makes a grown man's stomach drop. Outstanding debt obligations. Dear Mr. Hartwell, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Gerald Hartwell. Pursuant to the terms of the attached promissory notes, we are hereby exercising the acceleration clause effective immediately. You are required to remit the total sum of $480,500 within 30 calendar days. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. I held my pen above the signature line. My hand was still, it's always still, but something behind my ribs felt dense as river stone. This was the threshold. Once crossed, there was no path back. The letter in the mail meant the war was declared. This wasn't a request for repayment. It was a declaration. I let the text message surface in my mind one final time. Don't expect us to take care of you. I put my name on the line. Black ink permanent and without apology. Drummond lifted the letter, folded it, and slid it into a clean white envelope. He brought down a red stamp certified mail return receipt requested. It goes out in the morning, courier run, Drummond said. He'll have it by Monday. I got to my feet. There was fatigue in my bones, but underneath it something had clarified. The fog of ambiguity had lifted, and I could see the landscape plainly. What existed between my son and me was no longer a relationship tangled in guilt and unspoken expectation. It was a contract, clean lines, defined terms. One last question for Drummond. Would Colton call me? I asked when that letter landed on his desk. Drummond stood and extended his hand. His grip was the kind that means something. He'll call you Gerald. He'll scream at you. He'll weep. He'll make threats he can't back up. But it will be the first time in his life that he calls you with something resembling respect. Because it will be the first time he truly understands that you aren't just his father. You are the man who holds the keys to his cage. I walked out back to the elevator bank. The door shut behind me and I watched the floor numbers descend on the display. 40, 30, 20. Down toward street level, toward the rain, toward the silence of that empty house. But I wasn't going back down there as a man who'd been discarded. I was going back as the plaintiff. And God help the defendant when the court is in session. While I was in that lawyer's office signing documents that would rewrite their futures, my son and his wife were doing what they did best. Performing wealth at the most expensive brunch spot in downtown Portland. The Gilded Fern was that kind of place. $15 for a glass of orange juice, velvet on every wall, a room designed entirely to be witnessed, and Colton and Renata had built their whole existence around being witnessed. They occupied a prime window table, bathed in gray morning light that felt oppressive to me, but probably looked like silver to them. Colton's phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. He glanced at it. A slow, satisfied grin spread across his face, the grin of a man who just confirmed what he already believed. He didn't dial my number. He didn't flinch with concern. He simply angled the screen toward Renata so she could read it herself. He folded, Colton said, his voice carrying to the neighboring tables, without any effort to contain it. Told you he would. The old man runs on schedule. Renata took in the message, the one where I'd indicated I was selling the house and moving toward a care facility, and produced a laugh like shattering crystal. She brought her palms together, the diamond on her hand, scattering light across the ceiling. That ring, like most things in their life, hadn't been fully paid for. But in that moment, she carried herself like a sovereign who had just absorbed a new province. Finally, she said, lifting her mimosa, I was already researching how to have him declared mentally incompetent. This is so much tidier. Did he say when the sale closes? Colton forked a piece of his lobster Benedict and chewed without urgency. Next week, quick sale to an investment firm, cash, Renata, liquid. Zillow has the house at $1.5 million. Even discounted to $1.2 for a fast close, that is a serious sum of money. They didn't wonder which facility I'd chosen. They didn't ask whether I was frightened or lonely. They didn't raise the subject of my health at all. Instead, a napkin materialized from somewhere, and Renata produced a gold pen. She began writing not a message to me, not a word of acknowledgement. She was running the numbers. All right, she said, something predatory lighting her eyes. Conservative estimate net proceeds around $1 million after any remaining mortgage. Memory care runs about $6,000 a month for a decent place, but decent isn't a requirement. He needs a bed and access to a cafeteria, nothing more. Colton flagged down the waiter for another round. Exactly. There's a state-subsidized facility in Salem. Clean enough, functional. If we place him there, the cost is almost nothing. That leaves the equity largely intact. Renata drew a circle on the napkin and tapped it with the pen. We need to move on that capital now, Colton. We can't sit and wait. He could live another 20 years. The moment that check clears, you need power of attorney over his accounts. Tell him you're protecting him from financial scams. He trusts you. He's always been soft like that. I reconstruct this scene in my mind and it chills me to the marrow. But what follows is worse. They began spending my life's work somewhere between the appetizer and the entree. Debts first, Colton said, with the wave of a man who considers $40,000 a minor inconvenience. Clear the credit cards, roughly 40 grand, done. But then look at this. He flipped his phone around. A listing for a brand new Range Rover matte black exterior, red leather throughout. I cannot keep arriving at the firm in a 3-year-old BMW, he said. The partners notice these things. This says something different. It's only $120,000. Put 50 down from Dad's money, and the monthly note is comfortable. Renata was already scrolling on her own phone. And we are upgrading the Maldives trip. Business class is finished. We're on Emirates first class. I want the water villa with the private slide. $10,000 a night, but we've earned it. Managing your father's situation has been exhausting. We need to actually breathe. She looked across the table with full seriousness. And Colton, the Birkin. You made a promise. If this came through, you said the Himalayan Birkin. The reseller is holding one for $30,000. It's not a purchase, it's an asset. Appreciates better than most equities. Colton reached across and pressed his lips to her hand. Done. The instant the transfer hits, I'll move a management fee to my account, and we go. They raised their glasses toward each other. To family, they said. But they weren't talking about me. They meant the curated, expensive projection of a family they showed to the world. Beneath the table, Colton's knee was bouncing. He checked his phone a second time, not for my message now. He was staring at a bank notification. Insufficient funds. His card had been declined at a parking meter earlier that morning. He swiped it off the screen and held his expression steady for the half-second it slipped before he reconstructed the smile. Don't worry about the bill, he told Renata. Emergency card. We're essentially wealthy now, it's just a matter of the timing. They laughed loudly with the particular abandon of people who feel invincible in a restaurant. The waiter watched with quiet contempt. They were toasting a conquest that had never happened, dividing the earnings of a battle they had already lost without knowing it. Renata turned to the rain-streaked window. You know, she said, her voice adopting the texture of sympathy she didn't feel. I almost pity him in a way. Leaving that house, it must be hard. All those memories of your mother still there. Colton lifted one shoulder. He's been stuck in the past too long. Getting out is the right move. We're not the villains here. We're pushing him towards something better. We're the ones helping him let go. They believed it. Both of them. Completely. That was the part that settled in the gut. Like ice, they had rearranged the story so thoroughly inside their own heads that evicting an old man and packing him off to a state facility felt to them like an act of compassion. They left a disaster of a table behind them and a tip that bordered on insulting. Let's go to the dealership, Colton said as they pushed back their chairs and stood. Just a test drive to get a feel for it. Renata slipped her arm through his as they pushed toward the exit. Then the travel agent. I want those tickets locked in today and I want the confirmation up on Instagram tonight. The whole world needs to see that we're going to the Maldives. They stepped out of the restaurant, clearing a puddle without breaking stride, chins up. They looked like a power couple. They looked like people who were winning. They had no idea that across the city, a courier was at that very moment collecting a thick white envelope from the desk of Walter Drummond. They had no idea the clock on their lives had already begun running. They were sketching out a vacation. They should have been arranging last rites for their lifestyle. The arrogance was serving as a blindfold, and I was counting on every bit of it. I needed them saturated with greed. The harder they were riding, the more damage the fall would do. 2 weeks had gone by since I gave Drummond the order to ready the legal guillotine. 2 weeks of unbroken silence on my end. No calls placed, no messages sent. I sat in that house with the weight of 40 years of marriage pressing in around me, and I waited. I already knew they'd show up. Greed has its own gravitational field, and my house was the sun they kept circling. They picked Thanksgiving for their visit, grimly appropriate. A day built entirely around gratitude was about to be converted into an appraisal session. The Porsche rolled into the driveway at 10:00 in the morning. That car had come out of my pocket, but watching Colton kick the door shut behind him, I saw clearly that the particular arrogance he carried out with him, that was his own work entirely. Renata emerged neck sunglasses in place despite the flat gray Portland sky. She surveyed the house not with the warmth of someone returning somewhere familiar, but with the cold clinical assessment of a developer pricing a demolition. And then Finn came tumbling out of the back seat, clutching a plastic rocket ship, the single genuinely innocent presence within any reasonable distance. I pulled the front door open before anyone could knock. I wanted the threshold on my terms. Finn spotted me, and his face broke open with joy. "Grandpa!" He let the rocket ship fall and came running with both arms flung wide. Something in my chest, which I had been fairly convinced had petrified over the past 2 weeks, gave way just a fraction. I bent to meet him, but before Finn could close the distance, Renata's hand shot forward and caught his collar, hauling him up short. "Finn, honey, no!" The voice was performative sweetness drawn tight over something harder. "We don't jump on Grandpa. Remember what we talked about, he's old and he gets worn out. You could knock him over. You might even pick something up from him." I straightened slowly, joints announcing themselves. I was not ill. I was not fragile. I had put 3 miles on the treadmill that very morning, but in their version of events, I was already a vacancy, a corpse that simply hadn't been informed yet. "Hey, Dad." Colton moved past me into the hall without offering a hand. The cologne was expensive. Underneath it, something else was working a low current of anxiety he couldn't quite suppress. His gaze swept the living room, clocking every corner, looking for signs of decline. "We brought a turkey," Renata announced, breezing past me in the same motion. "Pre-cooked from Trader Joe's. We didn't want you fighting with the oven. Gas appliances at your age, it's just not worth the risk." No pause for a response. She walked straight into the dining room. I drifted after them, feeling less like the owner of the house and more like a draft moving through it. I had anticipated an uncomfortable family lunch. Stilted talk about nothing in particular, weather, maybe football. I was being naive. They hadn't come to eat. They had come to mark territory. Renata reached into her oversized bag and produced a fat stack of neon yellow Post-it notes. She peeled one free. The sound, a clean, sharp zip in the stillness of the house, cut right through me. She crossed to the mahogany sideboard, the piece Elaine and I had carried back from Edinburgh 30 years ago, and pressed the yellow square onto the polished surface. One word, thick black marker: keep. I stood at the kitchen island with my coffee and watched this unfold. I said nothing. I became the observer, the predator motionless in the grass, while the prey moved through the open, completely unaware the wind had already turned. "What are you doing, Renata?" I asked. My voice came out level without color. She didn't look up. She was already moving toward the china cabinet. Zip, another note. Keep. Just a bit of organizing, Gerald," she said, light and easy, like a woman sorting through a charity donation. "Colton told us the sale goes through next week. We're just helping you figure out what has value and what doesn't. You can't move all this heavy furniture into a nursing home. Those rooms don't have the square footage. So, we're sorting out what we're prepared to take off your hands. Prepared to take off my hands. As though they were performing a kindness. As though this were generosity." Colton came in from the living room with a tape measure extended, running it along the floor-to-ceiling windows. "These curtains are done," he said mostly to himself, but at a volume designed to carry. "Too dark in here. If we flip this or hold it as a rental before we list it, we need to open the space up, probably pull the wall between the kitchen and the dining room." He snapped the tape closed and turned to me. "Dad, are the blueprints from the '95 renovation still around? I need to identify the load-bearing walls. Renata has a vision for the flow." I took another measure of coffee. The bitterness steadied me. "I was under the impression the plan was to sell the house and fund my care," I said. "Why does the structural layout matter to you?" Colton laughed, quick, a little defensive, the laugh of someone managing down. "Eventually, sure, but we want to get the best return first. Or maybe we hold it as a rental for a couple of years, let the market do its thing. This isn't really your area, Dad. It's a different world now. You just concentrate on resting. Rest." That was their word for the thing that came after rest. I watched Renata drift toward the fireplace. Above the mantel hung the oil painting of the Portland skyline, the one mounted on hinges, the one with the wall safe sitting behind it. She tilted her head at it. "This is genuinely hideous," she announced. Zip. A note landed directly on the canvas. Sell. A hot surge of rage moved through me. I pressed it back under. Not yet. The snare needed another turn. I had to let them keep going. I had to see exactly where their limit was if they had one. They worked through the rooms the way a swarm moves, efficient, indiscriminate, unstoppable. Zip. Keep on the leather armchair. Zip. Trash on my complete run of engineering journals. Zip. Keep on the silver tea service Elaine had treasured. Not one question directed at me. Not a single dad does this one matter to you. Not a Gerald did you want to hold on to this album? As far as they were concerned, I had already been emptied out of my own life. I was simply an obstacle positioned between them and their inventory. Finn had settled on the floor, steering his rocket ship across the hardwood. He glanced up at me, face open and puzzled, taking in the yellow notes affixed to every surface like a spreading rash. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "why is Mommy sticking things on all your stuff?" I lowered myself down beside him, knees registering their usual complaint, which I ignored. I kept my voice low. "Because, Finn," I said, passing my hand gently over his hair, "your mom and dad are playing a game. They think they've gone shopping." "Can I play too?" he asked. "No," I told him quietly. "This one's for grown-ups who've forgotten how to act. You stay with your rocket ship. Rockets are straightforward. They either go up or they don't. They don't arrive carrying a turkey and a fistful of stickers." Renata reappeared from the back of the house. She had found her way into the master bedroom, my room, the one I'd kept closed since Elaine died. Not from grief alone, but because sometimes when I opened it, I could still catch the faintest trace of her. "Colton, come see this," she called out. I got up and followed. Renata was at Elaine's vanity, standing before the jewelry box I'd never bothered to lock, because a lock between me and those small moments felt wrong. The box was open. She had lifted Elaine's pearl necklace and was holding it to her own throat, watching herself in the mirror. "These are real saltwater pearls," she said, her voice carrying that particular unsteadiness that greed produces. "Vintage. These alone could be $5,000. "We'll put it down," I said. The room went completely still. It was the first direct order I had issued all day. Renata turned a flush moving up her face. She didn't put it down. Instead, she reached back and fastened the clasp around her neck. "Oh, relax, Gerald. It's just sitting here going to waste." Elaine would have wanted someone to actually wear it, someone young, someone with a life in front of them. Leaving it in a dark room helps no one. I'm preserving it, really. Preserving it. Colton moved into the space between us with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent years managing that particular gap. "Dad, she's got a point. Mom's things. It's just stuff. We are going to put it in a safe deposit box for the family. For the family." I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he married. I looked at the yellow sticky notes now scattered across every surface of my home. In that moment, I understood they weren't simply greedy. They were hollow, empty vessels trying to stuff themselves with things that weren't theirs, hoping the weight of it would give them some kind of meaning. I smiled. It was a cold, dry smile. "You know what?" I said. "You're right. It is just stuff. Take it. Take whatever you want. Mark it all up." Renata's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" I said. "Because by Monday, none of this will matter." They read that as a white flag. They figured I was finally settling into the role of the confused old man. What they couldn't know was that I was smiling because I was holding a card they hadn't seen yet. I knew the demand letter was sitting in the sorting facility at the downtown post office at that very moment. I knew that within 48 hours, the sheriff would be cataloging assets to seize, and every single item they were flagging with a yellow keep sticker was about to become evidence in a bankruptcy proceeding. "Go ahead," I said with a sweep of my hand toward the rest of the house. "Enjoy yourselves. Make yourselves at home." I turned and walked out of the bedroom and left them to their looting. Back in the kitchen, I refilled my coffee. I watched Finn playing on the floor. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was the one writing the final chapter, and I was simply letting the villains pen their own tragic ending before I shut the book for good. The house fell quiet again, broken only by the zip, zip, zip of sticky notes being peeled and pressed. It sounded like the ticking of a clock counting down, and I was the only one in the room who knew when it would go off. We gathered at the dining room table, a mahogany slab that had held 30 years of laughter arguments and raised glasses. Today it hosted a crime scene. The pre-cooked turkey from Trader Joe's sat in the center of the table, looking pale and dry. Renata hadn't thought to transfer it to a platter. She'd just folded back the aluminum foil and set the plastic container on the heat-resistant pad. It was a perfect metaphor for how they treated me. Convenient, stripped of warmth, and purely transactional. Finn was the only one eating with any real enthusiasm. He was mashing his potatoes with his fork and humming softly to himself. I watched him, wishing I could shrink the world down to nothing but that chair and that boy, and let every other person in the room just dissolve away. But I couldn't. I had a scene to see through. Colton cleared his throat. It was the sound of a salesman warming up his engine. He poured wine into his glass, filling it nearly to the rim, then set the bottle down, without glancing my way. "So, Dad?" He began, leaning back with a manufactured ease that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk logistics. If you are serious about moving to a facility, time is money. The market is shifting. Interest rates are ticking up. You don't want to leave this house sitting on the market for months." I cut a piece of the dry turkey. It tasted like sawdust. I chewed slowly, making him wait. "I'm listening," I said. Colton exchanged a quick glance with Renata. It was the look of two people who had rehearsed their lines on the drive over. "I took the liberty of pulling the comps in the neighborhood," Colton said. "The Miller place down the street moved for $1.3 million, but that had a renovated kitchen. Yours as well, it's 90s chic. But the lot is solid. I think if we list aggressively at 1.2, we can get a bidding war started." I repeated quietly. Colton smiled smooth, practiced the kind of expression he probably turned on first-time buyers who didn't know better. "Well, yes, I'm a licensed broker, Dad. It makes sense for me to handle the listing. Why hand 3% to a stranger when it stays in the family? I'll cut my fee to 2%. That's $12,000 back in your pocket right there. And I can manage the contractors for the staging. Renata has a real eye for that." Renata jumped in, gesturing toward the window with her fork. "We need to declutter right away." That's what the tagging was about. Most of this heavy furniture makes the rooms feel cramped. We rent a storage unit, clear everything out, paint the walls a neutral white, bring in modern staging pieces. It'll make the place read as bigger, fresher. I looked at the yellow sticky note on the sideboard. "Keep." I looked at the one on the china cabinet. "Keep." "So let me understand this," I said. "You wanted me to move out, pay you to sell my house, and pay for a storage unit to hold furniture you have already claimed for yourselves." Colton set his wine glass down with a frown. "You are twisting my words. We are trying to maximize your equity. This is your nest egg, Dad. We want you to get the most out of it." "And what happens to the money after the sale?" I asked. Colton gave a small shrug. "It goes into a managed account. I can help you with that as well. We'll build a conservative portfolio. Bonds, index funds, something stable. Draw a monthly allowance for your care facility fees and let the rest compound." "Compound for who?" I asked. "For you," Colton said, his voice climbing slightly. "For your future." I set my fork down. The metal rang against the china, a sharp little punctuation mark. I dabbed my mouth with the napkin. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. I could see the desperation living just behind his eyes. I saw the debts he wasn't mentioning. I saw the house of cards he'd constructed, and the way he was eyeing my home as the one thing that could hold it all upright. "You can stop the sales pitch, Colton," I said evenly. "You don't need to list the house." Colton blinked. "What do you mean? You can't sell it yourself. You'll get fleeced. You don't know the paperwork." "I didn't say I was selling it myself," I replied. "I said you don't need to list it because it is already sold." The silence that followed was absolute, dense and heavy like the air before a storm breaks. Renata froze with her glass halfway to her lips. Colton's jaw actually fell open. "What?" he whispered. I took a sip of water. "I signed the papers yesterday morning," I lied. "A private investment firm. They acquire properties for cash as is. No inspections, no staging, no fresh coat of white paint. They made me a flat offer and I accepted. We close on Monday." The color that rose in Colton's face was something I had never seen before. Not embarrassment, fury. "You sold the house without consulting me for how much?" "Market value," I said vaguely. "Enough to cover my needs." Renata slammed her glass down. Wine splashed across the tablecloth. "Who is the buyer?" she demanded. "What is the name of the firm? We need to see the contract. You probably got taken. You are an old man, Gerald. People target seniors. You could have walked away from hundreds of thousands of dollars." I am not senile, Renata, I said, my voice going hard. I was closing multi-million-dollar infrastructure contracts while you were still learning to color inside the lines. The deal is done. The money is wired. It's over. Colton got to his feet. His chair scraped violently across the floor. You can't do that, he shouted. This is a family asset. This is my inheritance. You can't just liquidate it without talking to me. I looked up at him, unmoved. I thought you had your own life, Colton. I thought you had your own family. Isn't that what you texted me? You told me to sell the house. You told me not to be a burden. I am doing exactly what you asked, liquidating my assets to cover my own care, so I never need a single dime from you. Why are you upset? You should be celebrating. You are off the hook. But the money, Colton sputtered. Where is the money going? I leaned forward. That is none of your business, just as my care is none of your business. Renata was on her feet now, her face twisted and ugly. She aimed a manicured finger at me. You did this on purpose, she hissed. You knew we needed that commission. You knew we were counting on managing that equity. You selfish old bastard. You sold it behind our backs just to spite us. I looked at Finn. He had stopped eating. He was shrinking into his chair, his eyes moving from his father to his mother, frightened. Stop yelling, I said, my voice low and carrying its own kind of danger. You are scaring the boy. I don't care, Renata screamed. What about the furniture? What about the pearls? What about everything we marked? The contract covers the house right. The contents are still ours. I rose slowly from my chair. I peeled the yellow sticky note from the sideboard. I crumpled it in my fist. What you are about to hear is the moment everything Gerald had quietly built behind the scenes finally comes into the light, and the cost of it lands on everyone in that room. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If someone close to you had been taking advantage of your generosity for years, would you confront them directly, or would you let the evidence speak for itself? Actually, I said, part of the deal included a vacancy clause. The house has to be empty by Monday. I've hired a junk removal crew. They come tomorrow. Junk removal. Colton looked like he was about to have a stroke. That is a $5,000 dining table. I know, I said. I bought it. And since I can't bring it with me to a nursing home, and since you have your own life and your own furniture, I donated it. All of it. The furniture, the silver, the books. Every bit of it is going to Goodwill. They are picking it up at 8:00 a.m. The tax write-off will be considerable. Renata made a sound that was half scream, half sob. The pearls. What about the pearls? I donated those to a battered women's shelter auction, I said. I thought it was appropriate. Elaine would have wanted them to go toward helping women escape bad situations. You gave away Mom's pearls, Colton whispered, fixing me with a look of pure hatred. You are sick. You are a sick, bitter old man. I didn't flinch. I walked around the table and took my place at the head of it, gripping the back of the chair. Get out, I said. Colton stared at me, stunned. What? It's get out of my house, I said again. Take your cold turkey, take your yellow sticky notes, and go. You came here to appraise me like a used car. You came to strip the copper out of the walls before the body had even gone cold. Well, the sale is closed, the shop is shut. Get out. Colton puffed up his chest, trying to loom over me. I was 65, but I had spent my working life on construction sites. I had faced down union bosses and corrupt inspectors. A soft-handed real estate broker in a leased suit held no power over me. This isn't over, Dad, he spat. I will contest this. I will get a lawyer. I will prove you are mentally incompetent and have this sale reversed. You won't see a dime of that money, I laughed. A genuine one this time. Go ahead, Colton. Get a lawyer. I strongly recommend you find a very good one. You are going to need him by Monday. He didn't follow what I meant. He thought I was bluffing about the house. He had no idea that the lawyer he actually needed wasn't for disputing a property sale. It was for defending against a foreclosure. Renata snatched up her bag. Come on, Colton, let's go. He's insane. We'll call Dr. Evans. We'll have him committed. She turned back. And we are taking the pearls, by the way. She reached for her neck, but I brought my hand down flat on the table. The silverware jumped. You walk out that door wearing those pearls, Renata, and I will call the police and report a theft. And I will press charges. Do you want a criminal record on top of everything else? She went still. She looked into my eyes and understood I meant every word. With a tremor of pure fury, she unclasped the necklace and threw it onto the table. It landed with a soft clatter beside the dry turkey. I hope you rot in that nursing home, she spat. I hope you die alone. I picked up the pearls and slipped them into my pocket. I already am alone, Renata. I have been since the day Elaine died. Having you two circling me like vultures didn't ease that loneliness. It just wore me out. Colton seized Finn's arm, pulling him roughly from the chair. We are leaving, Finn. Don't say goodbye to Grandpa. He doesn't love us. Finn looked back at me, tears running down his face. Every part of me wanted to go to him. I wanted to tell him I loved him more than anything in this world, and that everything I was doing was to make sure he didn't grow up to become the man now dragging him toward the door. But I held my ground. I had to remain the villain in their version of events so I could be the hero in his future. I watched them storm out. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I heard the Porsche engine snarl to life, an angry mechanical roar, and then the quiet returned. I surveyed the dining room. The yellow notes were still plastered to everything, little bright flags of greed. I crossed to the sideboard and peeled off the one that said, "Keep." I crumpled it and dropped it on the half-eaten turkey. I wasn't going to a nursing home. I wasn't selling the house. And I was most certainly not losing my mind. I was simply a father who had decided at long last to stop being a doormat. I settled back into the chair at the head of the table. I poured myself a glass of the wine Colton had opened. It was a cheap blend, acidic and sharp. I drank it anyway. Monday, I murmured to the empty room. Monday is coming. I glanced at my watch. The courier would be delivering the demand letter to Colton's office at 9:00 a.m. sharp on Monday morning. They believed they had lost an inheritance today. They had no idea they were about to lose their freedom. The sold house was only the opening move. The real blow hadn't landed yet. And I, Gerald Hartwell, was keeping my fist clenched tight. Monday morning came in with the hard, indifferent brightness of a day that cared nothing for your weekend. In the glass-walled offices of Coburn and Finch Real Estate, the air conditioning hummed its low, expensive note. Colton Hartwell sat in his ergonomic chair, the one that had cost more than my first car surveying his domain. He had on a new suit, a navy Italian cut, charged to a credit card already $3,000 over its limit. But it didn't matter to him. In his mind, the wire transfer from the sale of my house was practically already clearing. He was borrowing against a future he considered guaranteed. He knocked back a sip of his double-shot espresso and scrolled his calendar. Lunch with a developer at noon. He planned to order the most expensive thing on the menu and drop hints about coming into significant family capital. That was always the game: fake it until you make it, and then keep faking it long enough that no one notices there's nothing underneath. At 9:15, the receptionist, a young woman named Paige, whom Colton had been trying to impress for months, knocked on his glass door. She looked uneasy. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, "there's a courier out front. He says it's urgent legal correspondence and needs a signature." Colton smiled. He actually smiled. He rose from his chair and buttoned his jacket with a small flourish. He was certain it was the paperwork on the house sale. He thought I had surrendered entirely and was routing the documents through him so he could manage the proceeds. "I'll send him in, Paige," he said, his voice pitched low and authoritative. The courier was a compact man in a gray uniform carrying a thick white envelope with a red stripe. He had no interest in Colton's suit or the city view behind him. He simply extended a digital pad. "Sign here," he said. Colton scrawled his signature, that practiced arrogant loop he had been perfecting since high school. He took the envelope. It felt dense, consequential. "Thank you, my good man," Colton said, setting the envelope on his desk as the courier let himself out. He waited for the door to click shut. Then, with the giddy energy of a child on Christmas morning, he reached for his brass letter opener, shaped like a sword. He slit the envelope along the top. He drew out the stack of papers. The first thing his eyes landed on was the letterhead. Drummond and Associates. He smirked. He knew Drummond. That was my friend, the old lawyer who used to turn up at our backyard barbecues. Colton must have assumed Walter Drummond was simply facilitating the transfer of assets. He unfolded the cover letter. He started to read, and as the words registered, the air seemed to drain out of the room. The hum of the air conditioning went silent. The city noise beyond the window disappeared. The only thing left in the universe was the blood surging to his ears, a roaring, rushing tide of panic. Demand for immediate payment of outstanding promissory notes. Colton blinked. He shook his head, certain his eyes were failing him. He read the next line. "Dear Mr. Hartwell, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Gerald Hartwell. We are writing to formally notify you that Mr. Hartwell is exercising his right under Clause 4, Section B of the attached promissory notes to accelerate the debt and demand full repayment. Colton's hands began to shake. The paper rattled with a dry, papery crinkle that sounded impossibly loud in the still office. His legs gave out and he dropped back into his chair. He turned the page. There was a table, a spreadsheet. Date October 12th, 2013. Item, Porsche Cayenne purchase. Amount $80,000. Status unpaid. Date June 5th, 2015. Item, wedding expenses. Amount $150,000. Status unpaid. Date January 10th, 2022. Item, personal loan. Amount $50,000. Status unpaid. His eyes dragged down the column, past dates he had long forgotten, past amounts he had treated as gifts, past the memory of me pressing checks into his hand, while he smiled and promised to settle up someday. He reached the bottom line. The total. $482,500. Colton stared at the number. It sat on the white paper like a coiled snake, perfectly still and ready to strike. $480,500. It wasn't just a number, it was a death sentence. He couldn't pull in a breath. He tugged at his tie fingers, fumbling with the silk knot. His chest felt like something was sitting on it, the sudden crushing arrival of reality. He didn't have $400,000. He didn't have $40,000. What he had was $12 in his checking account and a wallet stuffed with maxed-out plastic. He read the next paragraph. You have 30 calendar days from the receipt of this letter to remit the total amount in certified funds. Failure to comply will result in the immediate filing of a lawsuit, a motion for summary judgment, and the subsequent seizure of assets, including but not limited to real estate vehicles and garnishment of wages. Seizure of assets. Garnishment of wages. Colton looked around his office. He thought about the lease on the BMW and the parking structure below. He thought about the penthouse he rented. He thought about the career he had constructed entirely on the scaffolding of an image. If his wages were garnished, if his car was hauled away from the company lot, if his own father dragged him into court, it was finished. The partners would cut him loose. The developer he was meeting for lunch would laugh him out of the room. Renata would leave him. Renata. God, Renata. He snatched up his phone. His fingers were slick with sweat. He unlocked the screen and dialed my number, not stopping to consider the hour, not pausing to recall that the last time we'd spoken, he had told me to vacate my own home. He acted on pure instinct, the way a drowning man lunges for anything floating within reach. The phone rang. 1 ring, 2, 3. Pick up, you old bastard, Colton hissed between his teeth, thus rocking in his expensive chair. On the 4th ring, the line opened. No greeting, no hello. Just silence. Dad! Colton's voice cracked apart. It came out high and thin, the voice of a frightened little boy. Dad, I just got this letter. What the hell is this? I let a beat pass before I answered. I was out on the porch watching the rain come down, working through a cup of tea. Hello, Colton, I said. My voice was level. It was the tone I used when I was reading a crack in a foundation wall, calm, technical, unhurried. Is this a joke? Colton shouted, scraping together what was left of his anger. Is this some kind of sick joke, $482,000? Are you out of your mind? I loaned you that money, I said, correcting him gently. And you signed for it. Did you go through the attachments, Colton? The ones bearing your signature? I didn't think you were actually serious, Colton screamed. Nobody does this to their own kid. You can't call in 10 years of loans in a single day. I don't have that kind of money. I know you don't, I said. That is why I gave you 30 days. You are a resourceful young man. You have your own life. You have your own family. I have confidence you will figure something out. Dad, please. Colton's voice broke again. You have to stop this. Drummond is out of his mind. If this lands in court, I lose my license. I lose everything. You should have considered that when you told me to sell my house and move into a state facility, I said. You wanted a transaction, Colton. You wanted to run our relationship like a business arrangement. Well, this is business, and the audit is long overdue. Dad, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I'm sorry about the text. Just tell Drummond to pull the letter. I took a sip of my tea. The rain was something to look at today. I can't do that, son, I said. The letter is already in the system. The clock is running. You have 29 days and 23 hours remaining. I'd suggest you stop shouting at me and start looking for a second job. But Dad, I hung up. I didn't slam it down. I simply pressed the red button. I pictured him sitting in that glass office holding a dead phone, surrounded by the debris of his own arrogance. I could see the panic taking hold of his throat. For the first time in his life, my son was staring at a problem that my checkbook wasn't going to solve. In fact, my checkbook was the one holding the gun. A twinge of sadness moved through me, deep and quiet, and I let it pass. A surgeon cannot weep while he is removing a tumor. He has to be steady, precise. And I still had a great deal of cutting ahead of me. Gravity is a funny thing. You rarely notice it until the floor disappears from under your feet. For my son Colton, the floor didn't just disappear. It was yanked away by a court order, stamped by a judge with no appetite for unpaid debts. I wasn't there to watch it unfold, but I didn't need to be. I knew the timetable. I knew that at 9:00 in the morning, Drummond had filed the ex parte writ of attachment. I knew that by noon, the electronic reach of the legal system would have extended into every financial institution in the state. And I knew that by 1:00 Colton would be sitting across a lunch table from a client he couldn't afford to lose trying to pay with money he no longer controlled. The restaurant was Le Bouchon. It was the kind of place where the napkins were folded from linen thick enough to sleep under, and the waitstaff spoke in hushed reverential tones, as if dining there were a solemn occasion. Colton was meeting Mr. Coburn, a developer who needed a broker to move 20 luxury condos. This was the deal that was supposed to rescue Colton's year. This was the commission that was meant to bury the gambling debts he was certain I knew nothing about. I can picture the scene without any effort. Colton leaning back in his chair, rotating a glass of Pinot Noir, laughing a half-beat too loud at Mr. Coburn's jokes, projecting confidence, projecting the image of the prosperous Hartwell heir. He probably ordered the Wagyu beef. He probably insisted on picking up the bill. And then the check arrived. Colton would have reached into his jacket, drawn out his sleek card holder, selected the platinum card, the one with the high limit, and laid it on the silver tray with the practiced flick of a man who does this all the time. "My treat," he would have said. A modest gesture of goodwill toward a future partnership. The waiter took the tray and moved off. Colton kept talking, checking his watch. Maybe his mind already drifting to the Range Rover test drive he had penciled in for later. 5 minutes passed. The waiter came back. No receipt. He was carrying the card between 2 fingers, the way you carry something you'd rather not touch. "I'm very sorry, sir," the waiter said, dropping his voice to that precise, devastating register of professional politeness. The card was declined. Colton laughed, a short, baffled sound. "That's not possible," he said. "Run it again? It's the chip. It's been giving me trouble." "I ran it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied, his expression composed into a mask of courteous regret. "The system is showing, do not honor, do not honor." 3 words. That's all it takes to strip a man of his dignity faster than a slap across the face. Colton's smile slipped. He could feel Mr. Coburn's eyes on him. The developer hadn't said a word, but his expression was contracting, narrowing at the edges. In the world of high-stakes real estate, a broker who can't cover lunch is not a man you trust with $20 million in inventory. "Here, try this one," Colton said, his palms going damp as he produced his backup card, the gold one. The waiter took it. He walked away. He returned 2 minutes later. "I'm afraid this one has been declined as well, sir." The room seemed to tilt. The air conditioning felt like it had cut out. A cold sweat rose at his hairline. This was not a glitch. This was a blockade. "I don't understand," Colton stammered. "I used it just this morning." He looked across the table at Mr. Coburn. The older man was already reaching for his own wallet, not smiling anymore. He looked like a man who had just recognized he'd spent 2 hours on a fraud. "Put it away, Colton," Mr. Coburn said, coldly dropping his corporate card on the table. "I've got it, but I think we're done here. My partners and I need someone with a solid footing." "Wait, let me call my bank," Colton pleaded half out of his chair. "Don't bother," Mr. Coburn said, rising and buttoning his jacket. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply walked out, leaving Colton standing alone at the table with 2 declined cards and a half-eaten steak that had become impossible to swallow. Colton scrambled out of the restaurant, indifferent to the stares following him across the floor. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. He tried to log in. "Access denied. Please contact your branch." He stabbed at the screen. He tried his savings account. "Access denied." He tried the joint account he shared with Renata. "Access denied." He stood on the sidewalk in the middle of the downtown Portland lunch rush and felt a cold wind cut straight through his expensive suit. He wasn't just broke, he was frozen. He had been digitally erased from the financial system. He called the bank. He fought through the automated menu until he reached a human. "Sir," the representative said, her voice perfectly. Even, "I'm showing a garnish order and a total asset freeze placed by the sheriff's department based on a filing from, let me see, Drummond and Associates. We are legally required to lock all accounts associated with your social security number." "My dad," Colton breathed. He actually did it. He ended the call. He needed to get home. He needed to find Renata. He needed a plan. He ran for the parking garage where he kept his leased BMW, but the nightmare had simply changed lanes. When he pulled up to his luxury apartment complex, the valet was nowhere in sight. Instead, a flatbed tow truck sat blocking the entrance, a massive ugly machine idling loudly and venting diesel exhaust into the afternoon air. And riding on its bed, hooked by the rear bumper, was his BMW. "Wait!" Colton screamed, sprinting toward the truck. "Stop! That's my car!" He reached the driver's door just as the truck lurched into motion. He hammered on the glass. The driver, a big man with a thick beard and the eyes of someone who had watched 1,000 desperate people do exactly this, cracked the window an inch. "Step away from the truck, pal." "You cannot take this," Colton shouted. "I lease it, it's not even mine." "Yeah, and the leasing company received a notice of default and a repo order about an hour ago." The driver said, bored flat. "Something about a lien holder exercising rights. You want to argue it, call the bank. Now, back up before I roll over your foot." Colton watched helplessly as the truck hauled his status symbol out into traffic. The BMW's alarm was chirping as it disappeared, a small, forlorn electronic cry that nobody answered. And then he heard the screaming. Not the alarm, Renata. She was standing in the building lobby, surrounded by 3 of their neighbors, wearing yoga clothes and clutching a yoga mat, and she looked like a pressure vessel about to rupture. "Colton!" She shrieked the moment she saw him. She pushed through the automatic doors without any concern for the scene she was making. "What is going on?" she screamed, thrusting her phone at his face. "I tried to pay for my Pilates class, and they cut up my card right in front of everyone. I tried to buy a smoothie, and it was declined. And now the concierge is telling me our key fobs have been deactivated because the rent check bounced." Colton looked at his wife. He didn't see a partner. He saw his own panic reflected back at double the intensity and none of the understanding. "It's my dad," Colton whispered. "He froze everything." Renata went very still. Her eyes widened, then contracted into slits of pure venom. "You told me he was bluffing," she snapped, bringing the yoga mat down against his chest. "You told me he was a weak old man. You said we had 30 days. "He accelerated the debt," Colton said, his voice unsteady. "It's a legal mechanism. He didn't wait out the period." "Then fix it," Renata screamed. "Fix it right now. I have a hair appointment at 3:00. I have people coming over tonight. I cannot get into my own apartment." People were slowing down to watch. The doorman had found something to study in the opposite direction. The neighbors were whispering. This was the couple that moved through the building as though they owned it, the couple that lodged formal complaints if the lobby floral arrangements weren't up to standard. Now they were on the sidewalk, locked out, wiped out, and tearing into each other. "I can't fix it," Colton said, tears beginning to press against the back of his eyes. "He took everything. The accounts are locked. The car is gone." Renata took a step back. She looked at him with a blend of revulsion and alarm. "So we have nothing?" she asked. "We have nothing," Colton admitted. She didn't put her arms around him. She didn't tell him they would get through it together. She looked at his empty hands and his gutted face and made her calculation. "I'm going to my mother's," she said, her voice gone cold. "Renata, wait," Colton pleaded, reaching for her arm. "Don't touch me," she said, pulling away. "You are a failure, Colton. You promised me a life. You promised me the Maldives, and now you can't even cover a smoothie. Don't contact me until you've sorted this out." She turned and flagged down a cab. She got in, and Colton stood on the curb watching it merge into traffic. It occurred to him then that she didn't have any cash on her either. She would probably have her mother waiting at the curb with money when it arrived. Renata always found a way to land on her feet. Colton stood alone in front of the building he could no longer enter. The rain started up again. He reached into his pocket to call a car, then remembered the app was tied to his card. The card was dead. No car, no cash, No credit, no wife, no way through the front door. He lowered himself onto the curb, not noticing the wet concrete seeping through his Italian suit trousers. He put his head in his hands. Across the city in my warm, dry study, I poured myself another cup of tea. I didn't need to witness him sitting there to understand that the lesson had begun. I had stripped away the insulation. I had removed the cushion that money provides against the world's hard edges. For the first time in 32 years, Colton was feeling the cold. I set the cup down and looked at the phone. He wouldn't call yet. He was still in shock, still in the denial stage where the mind refuses to accept what the eyes are showing it. But the hunger would come. The reality of a park bench or a borrowed couch would make itself felt soon enough. I took another sip. English breakfast, my favorite. The collapse was complete. Now came the waiting to find out whether there was anything underneath the rubble that was worth retrieving, or whether my son had always been facade all the way through. The hallway of the luxury apartment complex was hush-lined with thick carpet that carried a faint scent of lavender and money. It was the kind of quiet that usually meant comfort, but for Colton and Renata standing outside door 402, it felt like the silence of a sealed room. They had slipped into the building by following a delivery driver through the service entrance, a small, shabby victory that felt even smaller the moment they arrived at their own front door. The electronic lock blinked red, a small, steady, unblinking eye. Colton pressed his key fob to the sensor again. Nothing, no tone, no mechanical thud of the deadbolt releasing, just the same cold red light passing judgment. Colton pressed his forehead against the door. He looked hollowed out. The adrenaline of the restaurant and the tow truck had burned off, leaving behind a trembling, hollow dread. Beside him, Renata wasn't trembling. She was vibrating at a frequency that could crack porcelain. Arms folded yoga mat tucked under one elbow like a baton. She stood staring at the back of her husband's head, the way someone studies a target. "Open the door, Colton," she said, not loud, a hiss. "I can't," Colton said softly, his forehead still against the wood. The management company must have killed the access remotely. The rent check bounced Renata. The lease is in default. "Then kick it in," she said. He turned slowly, blinking at her as if she had just suggested something in a language he didn't speak. "Kick it in. Renata, this is a solid oak door with a steel core. There are cameras in every corner of this hallway. Do you want me to add breaking and entering to the roster of lawsuits my father is already filing?" Renata let the yoga mat drop. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. She moved in, close eyes gone bright and strange. "I don't care about lawsuits, Colton. My jewelry is in that apartment. My clothes are in there. My entire life is sitting 10 feet away from me on the other side of that door. Get me inside." "I can't," Colton said, his voice splitting on the word. The shout bounced down the long carpeted hallway. A door opened at the far end. Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow in 405, peered out, took in the scene, and drew quietly back inside. The lock clicked shut behind her. The sound of exclusion. "Look what you've done," Renata said, her voice dropping to a sneer. "You are humiliating us. Again." Colton slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor, pulling his knees to his chest and destroying the crease in his Italian trousers. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to hide under the dining room table when thunder rolled through the house. But there was no table to crawl under now, and the storm bearing down on him was entirely of his own construction. "Renata, please," he said, looking up at her. "I need you in my corner right now. We need to work through this together. We can go to your mom's place. We can regroup. I'll fix it. I'll go back to Dad. I'll get on my knees if that's what it takes." Renata laughed, a dry, airless sound with nothing warm behind it. "Your corner," she said. "You want me in your corner? Colton, look at yourself. You are sitting on the floor of a hallway. No car. No money, no credit. You don't have a corner. You are a liability." "That's not fair," Colton said. "I gave you everything you asked for. The trip to Barcelona, the car, the ring. You gave me those things with your father's money," Renata snapped, finally coming apart at the seams. She moved back and forth in the narrow hallway, hands flying. "I didn't marry a man, Colton. I married a prospect. I married the heir to the Hartwell estate. You told me your father was loaded. You told me he was old and checked out. You told me that managing his assets was practically a formality. I thought it was," Colton said. "You thought," Renata mocked. "You are 32 years old, Colton. You shouldn't be thinking. You should be knowing. You should have locked down the power of attorney years ago. But you were too lazy, too busy playing the big shot with your crowd to actually do the work of securing what was coming to you, securing what was coming to him. That was how she framed my life's work. A prize to be seized. I loved you, Colton said quietly. I thought that went both ways. Renata stopped pacing. She looked down at him. Her face changed, but not toward kindness. It shifted into something like pity, the kind of pity you feel for a dog struck by a car sad, but you have no intention of getting blood on your hands. Oh, Colton, she said almost gently. I loved the life we were living. I loved what we could have become. But love needs something to stand on. It needs a foundation. I can't love a man who can't get through his own front door. She reached into her bag. For a half second, Colton seemed to think she might be reaching for something that could help. Instead, she pulled out her phone. I'm calling a car, she said. My mother will cover it when I arrive. You are leaving me here, Colton said, the panic climbing back into his voice. Where am I supposed to go? I have no idea, Renata said, tapping her screen. Maybe go ask your father for a spare room. Oh, right. You torched that bridge too, didn't you? She glanced at the screen and frowned. 7 minutes out, she murmured. She moved to the far wall and leaned against it, putting as much distance between herself and Colton as the hallway would allow. They sat in silence for a long, airless minute. The red light on the lock blinked steadily. Blink, blink, blink. You know, Colton said, a thin edge of steel coming back into his voice. You are just as responsible for this as I am. You were the one pushing for the penthouse. You were the one who had to have the Maldives. You burned through the money just as fast as I was borrowing it. Renata raised her eyes from her phone, cold and flat. But my name isn't on the notes, is it? She said quietly. Colton went still. I never signed the promissory notes, Colton. She went on, a thin smile forming at the corners of her mouth. Your father was sharp, I'll give him that. But you were careless. You signed everything, the car, the wedding loan, the business loan. Every last one is on you. I am simply the spouse. And if I file for divorce before the bankruptcy proceedings begin, I can argue that I had no knowledge of the financial misconduct. I walk away clean. Colton stared at her. The air went out of him entirely. He understood in that moment that she had been building her exit from the very start. She hadn't just been spending money. She had been constructing a firewall around herself. You wouldn't, he whispered. Watch me, she said. Her phone chimed. Your driver is here. She pushed off the wall. She didn't glance back at the apartment door. She didn't spare a look for the life sealed away behind it. She simply straightened her coat and moved toward the elevator. Renata, Colton called out. Renata, come back. You can't leave me here like this. She didn't stop. She pressed the elevator button. The doors parted immediately as though the building itself was holding them open for her. She stepped in and turned around. For just a moment, their eyes met. Colton on the floor, in a ruined suit. Renata, standing straight in the elevator, already looking for her next landing spot. Good luck, Colton, she said. I hope you find a comfortable park bench. The doors closed. Colton was alone. He sat there for a long time. The silence of the hallway returned, but now it had weight to it, the full tonnage of his situation pressing down across his shoulders. He stared at the blinking red light on the lock. Still blinking, still keeping him out. In a way, it was also keeping the truth in. He had lost the house. He had lost the car. He had lost the wife. He reached into his pocket and drew out his phone. 12% battery. He opened his contacts. He scrolled past the drinking buddies. He scrolled past the business associates. He scrolled past Renata. His thumb came to rest on my name. Dad, he pressed it. The phone rang. Once, twice. I was in my study watching the rain come down. His name appeared on the screen. I knew exactly where he was sitting. I knew exactly who had just walked out on him. I let it ring. Not yet, son, I said to the empty room. You are not ready. You are still looking for someone to pull you out. You need to reach the bottom first. You need to feel the concrete under you. I declined the call. In the hallway of the luxury apartment, Colton listened to it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He just let the phone fall from his hand onto the plush carpet. He drew his knees closer to his chest and buried his face in his arms. And for the first time since he was a child, my son wept. Not the hot, indignant tears of a man who feels wronged, but the deep, heaving sobs of someone who has just understood that he is completely and utterly alone. Desperation has a smell. Stale coffee, cheap cologne, and cold sweat. That was the scent that met me when I walked into the settlement conference room at the county courthouse 3 days later. I wasn't obligated to be there. Drummond had told me I could stay home and let him handle the other side, but I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know whether my son had learned any humility or whether he was still trying to bluff through a hand he'd already lost. He was still bluffing. Colton sat on the far side of a scarred wooden table, looking wrecked. His hair was unwashed, his eyes were red around the rims, and the suit he was wearing looked as though he had slept in it for 2 nights. Beside him sat his legal counsel, not a partner from a downtown firm. This was a man named Mr. Petrie, whose business card probably listed DUI, defense, and slip-and-fall accidents on the back of a bus bench. Mr. Petrie wore a suit that was a full size too large and kept tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad that was nearly blank. Drummond and I settled into our seats across from them. Drummond set a single thick file folder on the table. The sound it made landing on the wood was solid and heavy, like a gavel coming down. Mr. Petrie cleared his throat. He made an effort to project authority, but his eyes kept drifting toward Drummond's briefcase. "Gentlemen," Petrie began, his voice thin at the edges, "we are here to file a countersuit against Mr. Gerald Hartwell for fraud, undue influence, and predatory lending practices against a family member. My client asserts that the funds transferred to him over the past 10 years were gifts widely understood within the context of a father-son relationship to be non-repayable. The so-called promissory notes were signed under duress and without the benefit of independent legal counsel. We are therefore moving to have the debt declared invalid." Colton nodded vigorously. "That's exactly right. You tricked me into signing those papers, Dad. You told me it was just for your records. You never had any intention of collecting. That's fraud." I looked at my son. He was grasping at anything he could reach, trying to reshape history around his preferred version of events. He genuinely seemed to believe that if he repeated the lie with enough conviction, the facts would rearrange themselves to accommodate him. Drummond said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened the file folder. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Mr. Petrie. "Exhibit A," Drummond said without inflection. "Email June 12, 2015, sender Colton Hartwell, recipient Gerald Hartwell, subject, the wedding." Petrie lifted the sheet from the table and straightened his glasses. "Kindly read the highlighted portion aloud," Drummond said. Petrie's voice was unsteady as he began. "Dad, I know asking for $150,000 is a lot, but Renata really wants this vineyard venue. I swear to you this is a loan. I will pay you back every cent once I get my commission from the Towers project. I am a man of my word. Please let me sign whatever you need me to sign to make this official." Drummond pushed a second page across the table. "Exhibit B, another thread, this one from October 2013. The subject, the Porsche." Colton's own words. "I don't want a handout, Dad. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Treat this car as an investment in my image. I will repay the principal plus interest. I want to do this the right way." Drummond folded his hands and leaned in. 47 pages of digital correspondence, Mr. Petrie. Every single exchange where funds moved between these 2 men, your client spelled it out in black and white. He intended to pay it back. He used words like loan, investment, and debt. The word gift does not appear. Not one time. The color drained from Colton's face. He slid lower in his seat. He had forgotten. He had forgotten what he'd promised when his back was against the wall. He had forgotten that nothing typed online ever truly disappears. Petrie studied the documents, then turned to look at Colton. That look held no warmth. It was the expression of a man who has just realized his client deceived him and dragged him into a slaughterhouse. "You swore there was nothing in writing," Colton Petrie said through his teeth. "You said every conversation was verbal. I didn't think about the emails Colton managed. It doesn't change anything, though. He's my father. He set me up." Drummond reached for one last item, a printed screenshot, a text message Colton had fired off to me on my own birthday. And here Drummond set his tone, going quiet and lethal. "Exhibit C, the message that activated the acceleration clause. Don't expect us to take care of you. I have my own life." He let the words sit in the air, then turned to Petrie. "Your client's entire argument rests on family affection, an undue influence that these were gifts, not debts. But that same client put it on record that he wanted nothing to do with his father, financially or emotionally. That's a contradiction you cannot paper over. You cannot invoke family loyalty when it suits you and throw it away when it doesn't counsel." Petrie shut his legal pad. His pen disappeared into his breast pocket. The fight had gone out of him. He knew what a courtroom would do with this. It wouldn't end in defeat, it would end in humiliation. "There's nothing left to discuss," Petrie said, getting to his feet and reaching for his briefcase. Colton lunged and caught his sleeve. "What are you doing? You can't leave." Petrie pulled free. "There's no case here, Mr. Hartwell. You put the debt in writing again and again. You signed the notes. On top of that, you torched your relationship with the lender in a text message. My counsel to you, settle this. Throw yourself on his mercy, because by every legal measure you are finished." He left without another word. The quiet he left behind had weight to it. The air conditioning droned on. Colton sat marooned on his side of the table. The swagger was gone. The contempt he'd worn like armor gone too. He lifted his eyes to mine across that table, and they were red-rimmed and glassy. "Dad," he said barely above a breath. I rose from my chair. I did up my jacket button. Victory was not what I felt. What settled into my chest was a bone-deep weariness. But I had come too far to pull back now. Walking away at this point would hollow out everything I had sacrificed to get here. "We will see you in court for the final judgment," Colton, I said. Then I walked out, leaving him behind with a paper trail that proved he had been dishonest long before he became desperate. The door closed at my back, shutting him in with every word he'd ever written. That click of the latch behind the lawyer who just abandoned ship left a silence heavier than any shouting match could have been. My son sat there across from me, folded into his chair, the way a puppet collapses when you drop the strings. He stared at the vacant spot where his attorney had just been, and then his gaze came back to me. There was nothing behind his eyes. Every other time in his life he'd looked at me, there had been entitlement in it or contempt. Not now. Now there was only fear. He was staring into a very deep hole, and he understood that I was the one deciding whether to lower a rope. Drummond said nothing, just kept tapping his pen against the tabletop in a slow, even beat. Tap, 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 the only noise in the room. It felt like something counting down. Colton dragged the back of his hand across his nose. "So, that's how it ends," he said, his voice fracturing. "You're going to destroy me, strip me down to nothing." I planted my elbows on the worn surface of the table and leaned toward him. I held his gaze. I didn't see a 32-year-old man sitting there. I saw the frightened child. He used to be the one who broke things and shoved the evidence somewhere no one would find it. "Ruining you isn't what I'm after?" "Colton," I said, keeping my voice low. "And your money means nothing to me. We both know the cupboard is bare. Even if a court handed me every asset you own, the bank gets the car first. The landlord claims the apartment, and whatever crumbs remain go to the tax authority. I'd be scrapping over nothing." Colton frowned. His mind wasn't following. "Then what? Why go through all of this? Why put me through this?" "Sometimes the only way to rescue the soil is to burn the field." "First," I told him, "your financial house was rotten at the foundation, built on promises you never meant to keep. I tore it down. But I am prepared to help you raise something honest in its place." My hand went into my jacket. What I drew out wasn't another legal filing. It was a single page, handwritten. I laid it on the table between us. "There is a door out of this, Colton, a genuine fresh start. I am prepared to forgive the full debt, the $482,000, the interest, the legal fees erased completely. The lawsuit gets pulled today." Colton's eyes dropped to the page. He couldn't process it. Something desperate and raw kindled behind his expression. "Really?" he said. "You'd actually do that, Dad?" "Thank you. I'll pay you back someday, I swear it. New job, new start. I raised a hand and cut him off. "Conditions," I said. "2 of them, non-negotiable." His head moved up and down. "Whatever it takes, name it. I'll cut your grass. I'll repaint the whole house. I'm not looking for a groundskeeper, Colton. I need someone to be a father to my grandson." I tapped the page. "First condition. You go after full custody of Finn. His current home environment is unstable, you know it, and the court will know it. I've already secured a small apartment for you. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and it's yours. No rent for 6 months as long as you hold down a job." He nodded. "Yeah, I want that. I want Finn. I love him. What's the second one?" I drew a slow breath. Here was the hard part. The thing that would cost him. "Second condition," I said, and my voice went flat. "You end the marriage to Renata. Today." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Colton jerked back like I'd thrown something at him. "No, Dad, no, I can't. She's my wife. I love her. She stopped being a partner to you a long time ago." "Colton," I said, "no softness in it. She's a parasite. 5 years she has been drawing from you. She drove a wedge between you and everyone in this family. She ran through money you were borrowing to survive. And the moment this thing started collapsing 3 days ago, did she pick up a bucket and help bail? No. She rolled up her yoga mat and disappeared. She panicked. Colton shot back, color rising in his face. The stress got to her. You've never understood her. She loves me. Every marriage has rough patches. I glanced at Drummond. He gave a small nod, opened a trim black folder, and slid a bank statement onto the table. I expected that answer, I told him, which is why I asked Drummond to dig a little deeper. We didn't stop at your accounts, Colton. We pulled hers as well. He looked down at the statement, his brow furrowed. What am I looking at? He said. An account at First National Bank, I told him, opened under Renata's maiden name 3 years ago. Study the deposit column. He ran his eyes down the entries. 200 here, 500 there, 1,000 routed across. She's been calling it her emergency fund, I said. Every time you came to me for money, every commission that hit your account, every payment you thought was going toward the bills, she was quietly skimming a cut. I watched his face change as his eyes reached the final line. $52, I said, reading it aloud. Colton said nothing. He just sat there running the numbers. 6 months ago, I went on, keeping my voice low. You came into my office in tears begging for $50,000 to cover a gambling debt. You told me you were terrified Renata would find out. You said it would destroy your marriage. Colton gave a slow nod. She had $52,000 parked in that account, Colton. While you were sobbing in front of your father, hat in hand, your wife was sitting on enough money to have bailed you out herself. And she said nothing. She watched you go under. She watched you humiliate yourself in front of me. She watched you put your name on a promissory note that became a chain around your throat. And she kept every dollar of it. Colton stared at the statement. His hands began to tremble. Everything in him wanted to reject what he was seeing, but the figures were merciless. Why, he managed. Why would she do that? Because she was never in your corner, son, I said. She was hedging. She kept a separate account, the way you keep a spare key for the day. Everything locks you out. And 3 days ago, when the money dried up, she didn't pick up the phone to help you. She called a divorce attorney. Drummond placed a final document on the table. It was a consultation receipt from a high-end family law firm dated the morning after the asset freeze. She's already moved on, Colton, I said quietly. The only thing left to decide is whether you go down with her or whether you cut yourself free. He picked up the receipt. He checked the date. He checked the time. It was stamped just 1 hour after I had frozen the accounts. While he was sitting on a curb in the rain falling apart, she was across town signing a retainer to end the marriage. A sound came out of him. Low and guttural, the sound of something trapped with no way out. He crushed the receipt in his fist. His eyes shut and tears pressed through hot and sudden. He remembered the look on her face in that hallway. He remembered her saying, "I didn't marry a man, I married a potential." He remembered the yellow sticky notes she had left stuck to my furniture, and it hit him. Then he hadn't been a husband. He had been a resource. He drew a breath. It shook on the way in, but when his eyes came open again, something had shifted. The boy was gone. A broken man sat in his place. Broken, yes, but for the first time seeing things as they actually were. "Where do I sign?" Colton said. Flat. Final. No drama left in him. I slid the agreement in front of him and set a pen on top of it. "This is the right call," I told him. Colton said nothing back. He just signed. It wasn't the loose, arrogant flourish he'd used on the promissory notes. It was a heavy, deliberate scratch of ink. The signature of someone closing the door on one version of their life and stepping uncertain into another. He set the pen down. "I want my son," he said. "I want Finn. You'll have him," I told him, "and your self-respect. It won't come back overnight. It's going to cost you. But when it's there, it'll be something you earned, not borrowed, not purchased. Yours." Colton got to his feet. He didn't extend a hand. He didn't reach for me. He gave one short, sharp nod of his chin. "Thank you, Dad," he said. Then he walked out. He walked like a man carrying something heavy, but carrying it himself. He had no money. He was about to be divorced. He had no home to go back to. But watching him go through that door, I knew the thing that had been consuming him was gone. The parasite had been removed. Now the healing could begin. Time is the only honest accountant. It has no interest in your credit rating or your surname. It only tallies what you do with the hours in front of you. For my son Colton, the past 12 months have been the hardest of his life by a long measure. but they have also been the most real. Yesterday, I drove out to a construction site in North Portland. Rain was coming down because this is Portland, and the sky rarely lets you forget how temporary everything is. I pulled my 6-year-old Chevy truck to the curb across the street and sat there watching. The site was a new mid-rise apartment complex going up. The ground was a swamp of mud. Jackhammers and diesel engines made it impossible to hear yourself think. And there, in the middle of all of it, was Colton. No Italian suit. He had on a high-visibility vest over a worn canvas work shirt, no wine glass in his hand. He was gripping a shovel. I watched him work. He wasn't just turning dirt. There was a rhythm to it, steady and deliberate, something I hadn't seen from him since his varsity baseball days when he was a teenager. Sweat on his face, grime across his jaw. He looked worn through, but he didn't look empty. A foreman came over shouting above the grind of a cement mixer. In another life, Colton would have rolled his eyes at a man like that. He would have muttered something cutting under his breath. He would have felt above it. But today Colton just nodded, wiped his forehead on his sleeve, and got back to the shovel. He hoisted a heavy bag of cement, the effort showing across his shoulders. No complaint. He just did what needed doing. I found out later he's earning $22 an hour, less than he once spent on a single lunch without blinking. But every Friday that paycheck goes toward real things. He covers his own rent on the studio apartment I helped him get. He buys his own groceries. He pays for his own bus pass, no car yet. And he pays me. Every month without fail, a check arrives for $200. It's a symbolic amount. I told him the debt was wiped, that he didn't owe me anything. He wouldn't hear it. He said he needed to watch that balance shrink even if it takes him 100 years. He needed to feel the weight of what he'd borrowed. As for Renata, she was gone almost before the ink dried on the divorce papers. Word came to me that she moved to Los Angeles inside of a week. Social media fills in the rest of the story. She's with a producer now, 20 years her senior. She posts photographs from yachts and red carpet arrivals draped in jewelry that probably doesn't belong to her. She looks happy in the way that people look happy when they're running very fast from themselves, bright and hollow at the same time. She never reached out about Colton, never asked about the debt. She didn't ask about me. She shed her old life the way something cold-blooded sheds its skin, and she slid into a new one. I don't carry hatred for her. What I feel is closer to pity, because the day will come when she runs out of people to feed on, and she'll have nothing left to look at but her own reflection, and she'll see that she's consumed everything around her and is still hungry. But Colton is feeding himself now. I watched him on his lunch break. He settled on a stack of drywall and opened a plastic container. No Wagyu. A sandwich one he'd made himself. And he wasn't eating alone. 2 other workers sat nearby, and the 3 of them were laughing. Real laughter. Not the practiced careful kind you hear in conference rooms. The kind that comes from the gut, from a man with nothing to prove. His eyes found my truck. He stopped mid-bite. He stood up. For a moment I thought the embarrassment might win, that he'd look the other way. But he raised his hand. A simple, tired wave. I waved back. He tapped his watch, signaling he had to get back, then turned and picked up the shovel again. He didn't walk over to ask for anything. He didn't come to complain. He simply acknowledged me across the distance and returned to his work. That shovel is teaching him more about money than his business degree ever managed. It's teaching him that every dollar stands for something: time, labor, effort. Once you understand that, you stop buying a Porsche to impress people you don't care about. You buy a decent pair of boots because the road ahead is long. I turned the engine over and pulled away. There was nothing more I needed to see. My son was no longer a millionaire on paper. He was something more valuable, a man building something real. And for the first time in 32 years, I felt genuinely proud of him. Not for what he had accumulated, but for how he was carrying everything he had lost. The lake was still that morning, the surface a flat mirror throwing back the gray of the clouds drifting above. I sat out on the wooden dock with my legs hanging over the edge, watching the red and white bobber ride the gentle water. Beside me, Finn held his small fishing rod with a concentration that made me smile to myself. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't asking to go inside. He was just watching the water, learning the old quiet art of patience. It has been a year since I chose to go to war with my own son. A year since I concluded that real fatherhood sometimes means becoming the villain in your child's story, so that one day he can be the hero of his own. People talk about unconditional love as though it means accepting whatever someone does without consequence. They think love is a soft blanket you wrap around your children to shield them from the cold. But what I've come to understand is that sometimes love is the cold itself. Sometimes love is the wind that tears away what is dead, so that something living can push through underneath. I looked over at Finn. He is growing up in a different world than his father grew up in. A small apartment is his home now. He watches his dad come through the door, exhausted dirt worked into the creases of his hands. He watches his dad plan out the grocery run, and because of that, Finn is learning what a dollar actually means before he's ever tackled long division. He is learning that respect gets built, you can't charge it to a card. Colton is not the man I once imagined he would become. He is better than that man, quieter. He listens far more than he talks. The arrogance that used to sit on him like a coat of cheap paint has been worn away by the grinding friction of an honest life. He is raw right now, but he is genuine, and when he looks at me these days, he doesn't see a source of funds. He sees a man. I drew my line in, slowly feeling the pull of the water. There is a ledger sitting in my safe that finally balances. The debt has been settled not in dollars, but in character. I've come to understand that the greatest thing I could ever leave behind isn't the house, the stocks, or the old furniture. It's the lesson that you are only entitled to what you build yourself. It's the knowledge that rock bottom, as it turns out, is the most solid foundation there is. Finn's bobber plunged under the surface. He sucked in a breath, eyes going wide. "Grandpa, I got one," he shouted. I didn't reach across for the rod. I didn't offer to take over. I leaned back and let him work, watched him bear down, watched him figure his way through it. "You got this, Finn," I told him quietly. "It's all you." And as I watched him haul that fish up out of the water, silver and flashing in the flat morning light, I knew the Hartwell legacy was in safe hands. Not because of what I handed them, but because of what I held back. In the end, the harshest thing I ever did turned out to be the most loving thing I ever did. I stopped rescuing my son so that he could finally discover how to rescue himself. A checkbook is the worst parenting instrument a father can reach for. Real love isn't about standing between your children and every hard thing coming their way. It's about making sure they know how to raise their own shelter when the storm arrives. By cutting Colton off, I didn't walk away from him. I handed him back something no amount of money could have bought his own dignity. If you have stayed with me this far, then you already know this story was never really about the money. What Gerald did cost him years of sleep, a great deal of pain, and the willingness to let his own son hate him, at least for a while. I believe God sometimes calls us to do the hard thing, the thing that looks like cruelty from the outside, but is the only real act of love left available to us. Gerald could have kept writing checks. He could have kept pretending. Instead, he chose the longer road, the one that led somewhere worth going. That choice was the most honest thing he ever did as a father. If this story taught you anything, let it be this. Document what matters. A handshake and a good feeling are not an agreement paper is. When someone shows you who they are at their worst, believe them the first time. Loyalty is not the same as blindness. Rock bottom is not the end. For Colton, it became the only foundation solid enough to build something real on. And if you are a parent watching a child spiral, cutting them off is not abandonment. Sometimes it is the only way to hand them back their own life. This is the kind of family revenge story that doesn't end with a villain defeated so much as a family slowly, painfully repaired. And for those of us, adults 50 plus, who have lived long enough to know how these things really go, there is something deeply true in the ending. Gerald found not a trophy, but a boy on a dock, learning to be patient, and a son who finally learned to carry his own weight. If this one stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me what hit you hardest. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this, a parent, a friend, anyone carrying a weight like Gerald's, please pass it along. Subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories so you never miss the next one. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.